Did you tell him you loved him?
Yeah, it was the last thing we said to one another.
It was?
Yeah. He said, I love you. He says, I love you too, Dunk. I got back to work right after my brother passed. It was very difficult at times, and there were moments that when it helped me get through it.
For decades, fans knew her as the unstoppable force of dance pop, the soft-spoken sister of Michael Jackson, who rose from the shadow of a dynasty and became a legend in her own right. But what the world never saw was the pain Janet Jackson carried when the spotlight faded. Behind the platinum records and the world tours lies a story far darker than anyone imagined. The heartbreak of losing Michael, the scars of public humiliation, and the battles she fought behind closed doors just to stay standing. And now, she has confirmed what many long suspected, a revelation that changes everything we thought we knew about her life. This is the tragedy that shaped Janet Jackson, and the truth that only now is coming to light. Janet Demita. Joe Jackson entered the world on May 16, 1966, in Gary, Indiana, the youngest of 10 children packed into a tiny 2-bedroom house on Jackson Street. Long before the fame, she was just a little girl growing up in poverty, surrounded by noise, discipline, and dreams far bigger than the walls around her. 11 people shared the cramped home. Children slept head to toe, while the kitchen doubled as a rehearsal room where ambition replaced tenderness. Her father, Joe Jackson, worked long days in the steel mills and spent nights pushing his children toward perfection. Her mother, Catherine, tried to shield them with strict Jehovah's Witness beliefs, but grief already lingered in the family. Marlon's twin brother had died at birth, a loss that cast a quiet shadow over everyone, especially the youngest. Affection was rare, discipline was constant. The Jackson children were raised to perform, not to play. Janet later admitted she often felt invisible in the shadow of her dazzling brothers, especially while watching Michael become a child star. Everything changed the day Tito accidentally broke Joe's guitar string and revealed the talent that sparked the Jackson 5. Fame swept the family from Indiana to Los Angeles, and by age 7, Janet was performing in Las Vegas. Her childhood traded for stage lights and rehearsed smiles. She once dreamed of being a jockey or a lawyer, but the decision was never hers. She grew up caught between two extremes, a house full of siblings, yet an inner loneliness, a life lifted from poverty, yet defined by pressure. Those early scars of loss, discipline, and displacement would one day become the very force behind her strength, her music, and the voice the world would come to know as Janet Jackson. Fame came far too early for Janet Jackson, a glittering gift wrapped in applause but weighted with expectations she never chose. At just 10 years old, she was placed on the family variety show The Jacksons, her smile practiced, her lines memorized, her childhood traded for studio lights. Soon after, she became Penny Gordon on Good Times, playing a girl from a broken home while quietly carrying her own burdens behind the scenes. More roles followed, a new kind of family, different strokes, each one polishing her image but pushing her further from her own identity. Music was no different. Under her father Joe's control, she released 2 albums that showcased her voice, but not her soul. She later admitted she felt more like an extension of her family brand than a person with her own dreams. By her late teens, the pressure of living in Michael's shadow grew suffocating. No matter what she did, she was still seen as his little sister, not Janet. That frustration fueled a turning point. In 1986, she made the bravest decision of her career. She cut ties with her father and teamed up with Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis. In 6 intense weeks, they created Control, an album that didn't just introduce Janet Jackson to the world, it declared her independence. With hits like Nasty and What Have You Done For Me Lately, Control sold over 10 million copies and proved she was no longer following anyone's lead. After Control, Janet Jackson reached even higher. And then came Rhythm Nation 1814. Released in 1989, it wasn't just an album, it was a cultural mission. With songs about racism, poverty, and injustice, it became one of pop music's most socially conscious records. But the brilliance behind it demanded everything from her. Rehearsals were grueling, the choreography brutal, and the pressure relentless. Night after night she delivered perfection, then returned to empty hotel rooms, exhausted and aching. Still, the results were historic. The music videos defined MTV, the tour shattered records, and Janet became the first and only artist to score 7 top 5 singles from a single album. In those years, she stood beside Madonna and even Michael, not as a shadow, but as a force of her own. In 1991, she signed a groundbreaking $32 to $50 million deal with Virgin Records, the biggest contract ever given to a female artist. The headlines celebrated her achievement, yet privately she still carried the weight of endless comparisons, constantly asked if she was only a reflection of her brother's greatness. Her next chapter arrived with Janet, 1993, a softer, more intimate reinvention. That's the Way Love Goes won her a Grammy and, more importantly, marked her claim to her own identity, her body, her voice, her artistry. For countless women, Janet became proof that a woman could lead, redefine herself, and take control of her image on her own terms. But fame never came without pain. No matter how high she soared, comparisons to Michael clung to her like chains. Interviewers still called her the little sister. Every success was measured against him. That pressure followed her everywhere, and the wounds at home cut even deeper. In her 2022 documentary, Janet revealed how Michael sometimes teased her about her weight. Jokes to him, but knives to her. In a world already harsh on women's bodies, those words carved scars that no award could erase. The grind of fame only added to the burden. Tours pushed her body to its limits. Sleepless flights and endless rehearsals drained her spirit. On stage, she was fire. But off-stage, she often returned to hotel rooms that felt painfully quiet. Surrounded by millions, she had never felt more alone. That loneliness poured into The Velvet Rope, 1997, her most vulnerable masterpiece. For the first time, Janet admitted she had battled depression, and she bled that truth into her music. The album confronted identity, self-worth, trauma, survival. Critics hailed it as her boldest work. Fans said it saved their lives. Janet later reflected, "Writing that album was like putting a bandage on my wounds." For her, music wasn't just expression. It was survival. But storms she never caused began tearing through her life. In 1993, just as she was about to sign a massive Coca-Cola deal, scandal struck Michael, and overnight, her opportunity vanished. Janet was devastated. Later she would say, "Guilty by association, isn't that what they call it?" She paid for sins that were never hers. Even her 1995 reunion with Michael on Scream brought little comfort. Handlers kept them separated, filming on different sets, as if the world no longer allowed them to simply be siblings. "It felt like we weren't allowed to be family anymore," she admitted. Then came the heartbreak that nearly ended her career. The 2004 Super Bowl wardrobe malfunction lasted less than a second. But the backlash consumed years. The media erupted. Radio stations banned her songs. TV networks pulled her videos. Her male counterpart walked away almost untouched, while Janet was vilified nationwide. "One mistake on stage," she said later, "and my entire career was judged." For a time, she lived in silence, pushed out by an industry she once ruled. But she refused to stay broken. In 2015, she returned with Unbreakable under her own label, a title chosen like a declaration: wounded, punished, doubted, but never destroyed. Through every storm, she kept rising. Not because applause saved her, but because music always did. Janet became more than a superstar. she became a symbol of resilience. Her scars became verses. Her pain became power. And she rewrote pop history not just with brilliance, but with endurance. But while her career was a battlefield, her first step into love carried wounds of its own. At just 18, seeking escape from Joseph's control, she secretly married James DeBarge. What she hoped would be freedom became another prison. James battled addictions that overwhelmed her innocence, turning their short-lived romance into nights of chaos, fear, and emotional abandonment. Friends recalled how she would slip out into the night just to breathe. The marriage unraveled within a year. The annulment came in 1985, but the damage lingered. Decades later, Janet admitted, "I wanted to be on my own, but I made a mistake." It wasn't just heartbreak. It was a lesson in how easily control could disguise itself as love. Then came the rumor that haunted her for nearly 40 years, whispers that she'd secretly given birth during that marriage. Tabloids fueled it, strangers speculated, and the lie followed her everywhere. In 2022, she finally ended it with 5 exhausted words. That was not true. The true tragedy wasn't the failed marriage. It was the innocence it cost her. At 18, Janet believed love would save her. Instead, it scarred her, teaching her that escape is not freedom, and that not every embrace is safety. If her first marriage had been a reckless escape and her second a love she believed would last forever, Janet's relationship with Rene Elizondo Jr. was the one that shaped her most. They married in secret in 1991, and while Rene stayed mostly out of the spotlight, he became her closest partner, a collaborator, confidant, and the quiet presence behind some of her most intimate creative work. He filmed her videos, co-wrote songs with her, and shared a private world where she felt safe enough to simply be Janet, not the global icon carrying the Jackson legacy. For nearly a decade, their life together felt like a sanctuary. But behind the closed doors, cracks slowly began to form. By the late 90s, the closeness that once defined them faded into distance. Arguments replaced laughter, and their creative partnership turned into something far more fragile. In 1999, the marriage they had hidden from the world became public only because it ended, suddenly, painfully, in a divorce filing that stunned everyone. What followed was years of courtroom battles. Rene demanded millions, and their deeply private love story was dragged into headlines and legal documents. For Janet, the financial loss mattered far less than the emotional betrayal. She had trusted him with her heart, her art, and her silence, only to see their history turned into spectacle. Yet even through the bitterness, there was still tenderness. In her 2022 documentary, Janet said quietly, "I loved Rene very much, and he knew it." Years later, Rene would echo that sentiment, calling her an extraordinary woman. Their story hadn't ended in hate. It had ended in heartbreak. Perhaps the greatest ache was the absence of children. They had once imagined a family, but the years slipped away, and the dream disappeared with the marriage. When it collapsed, Janet was left with silence and the heavy weight of what might have been. The devastation wasn't in the money or the rumors. It was in realizing that even love, once so steady, could fracture. Her first marriage cost her innocence. This one cost her certainty. And yet, she rose from it, stronger and more guarded, carrying a new truth. Freedom isn't given by someone else. It is forged within. Life, with its cruel symmetry, placed heartbreak right beside Janet Jackson's greatest miracle. Only months after the birth of her son Isa, she and Wissam Almana separated. There were no scandals, no accusations, just a heavy, undeniable silence. Two people who loved their child but could no longer walk the same path. For Janet, it wasn't just the end of a marriage. It was the collapse of a dream she had built late in life the dream of giving Isa the stable home she never had. She carried that pain quietly. At night, watching her son sleep, she often prayed he would never feel the fractures she once lived through. The wound wasn't only losing a partner, it was losing the childhood she wanted to give her son. Yet in that heartbreak, she found her deepest source of strength. Isa became her anchor, the love that didn't falter, the bond that no separation could break. Even apart, she and Wissam chose to co-parent with intention, shielding their child from the spotlight that had consumed so much of her own youth. Later in 2017, when Janet returned to the stage with the State of the World tour, fans expected the superstar they remembered. But what they saw was something even more powerful. She was reborn. Her performances hit harder, her presence felt heavier, shaped by everything she'd survived. On stage, she was rhythm and fire. Off stage, she was simply mom, holding the child who had changed her life. That duality, icon and mother, survivor and nurturer, became her truest identity. The legacy of her marriage to Wissam wasn't its end, but the life it created. From their union came Isa, her miracle, her quiet revolution. Motherhood wasn't the consolation prize of heartbreak. It was her greatest victory. The marriage fractured, but from its ashes rose a love unbreakable and eternal. But if the endings of her marriages were wounds she carried privately, the loss of her brother Michael shattered her in a way nothing else ever had. The world lost an icon in 2009. Janet lost her other half. Michael had been her protector, her rival, her mirror. The boy who shared her childhood dreams and her father's harsh discipline. His sudden death at 50 left a silence too deep for words. She mourned quietly while the world mourned loudly. At his funeral, watched by more than 1 billion people, grief echoed everywhere, yet none felt the emptiness like Janet. Months later, at the MTV VMAs, she honored him by performing Scream. With Michael's image towering behind her, every movement was a cry of love, rage, and unbearable sorrow. Millions wept, but no one felt the loss as she did. For the world, Michael's death closed a chapter. For Janet, it left a permanent ache. She would later say, "There's not a day I don't think of him." In hotel rooms, especially in Paris, she would let his music play through the night, crying until dawn. Michael's legacy lived on through his 3 children, Prince, Paris, and Biggie, and through an estate that rose from debt to billions. But for Janet, no number could measure what she lost. As if losing Michael hadn't already carved a wound too deep to ever close, life struck Janet Jackson again. First with the passing of her father, and then with the loss of another brother. Each death reopening scars she had fought to live with, each one reminding her that the once unbreakable Jackson dynasty was slowly fading. In June 2018, Joe Jackson died at 89. To the world, he was the iron-fisted architect who built the Jackson 5 from the dust of Gary, Indiana. But to Janet, he was a contradiction she never fully understood. A father who demanded excellence but withheld affection, who pushed his children to greatness but left them carrying invisible bruises. His death didn't come with global tributes like Michael's, yet it stirred a storm inside her. She mourned the man who built her path even as she carried the pain of the childhood he shaped. "Without him there would be no Jacksons," she once said, but the cost was high. Her grief was complicated. Part sorrow, part relief, all tangled in years of unresolved love. Then, just as time began to soften that ache, another loss shattered her. In January 2024, her brother Tito Jackson passed away at 70. To the world, he was the quiet Jackson, the steady guitarist who never chased fame. But to Janet, he was warmth and loyalty, a gentle constant who had helped hold the family together after Michael's death. Losing Michael tore a hole in her heart. Losing Tito felt like watching the remaining threads of her childhood unravel. At 59, Janet stands not just as a superstar, but as a survivor shaped by both triumph and tragedy. Her life now moves between two worlds, the stage that made her immortal and the quiet life she's built for her son, Issa. Her estimated $200 million fortune reflects decades of work, discipline, and reinvention. Real estate has been part of that journey. A glass apartment above Central Park that she sold for $8.8 million, peaceful estates in Bel Air and Rancho Santa Fe, and homes that served as shelters during the hardest chapters of her life. Today, she divides her time between Los Angeles and London, choosing privacy over spectacle. Her London home is discreet, tucked in a quiet neighborhood where she can walk Issa to school without cameras. In L.A., her houses feel less like mansions and more like sanctuaries, places where bedtime stories matter more than trophies. For Janet, home is no longer a symbol of wealth, but a refuge where her son's laughter replaces the noise of the world. Her fame built empires, her losses built strength. But it is in her quiet, private life, the one she protects fiercely, that she has finally found peace.